All right, we'll go ahead and get started since it's 5 o'clock. Welcome to our August 2020 Central Illinois chapter meeting. Today, we just start out with a few announcements before we get started. So our Professional Development Day registrations are now open, and it's online at pmi-cic.org. This is scheduled to happen on September 30th, 2020. Our early bird registration is until September 10th. So go ahead and go out there. It is going to be all virtual this time around. So go out and get registered, and then there are links to videos and content out there of what you'll be seeing. And then real quick, I want to switch my screen over to a different screen. And so over the last several meetings, we have been using Slido for a Q&A. So we're going to post in the chat the link to the Slido. However, the hashtag that you can use for this event is, I just had it, hashtag PMI expert. And it will bring you into the Slido account where you can type in your questions. Additionally, we do have a poll going on this time around what project management framework do you prefer. So make sure that you type in your questions here. It'll be an easy way for us to track because sometimes things in the chat can get kind of misplaced. So ask your questions throughout here and we'll get those asked for you. Let me switch my screen again. Sorry about that. All right. Then we just want to remind you guys that we have partnered with CPS Media for sponsorship and marketing of your product and or service. So if you have any questions about that, you can send that off to our VP of Publicity at pmi.org for questions and sponsorship opportunities. We additionally, with CPS Media, have created a job portal on our PMI CIC website. You just have to go to the job bank landing page. And under Job Bank, the hyperlink is embedded under the PM local jobs. If you missed the webinar today, you can view it later at your convenience on our Facebook page. The Facebook key search is PMI CIC. So without further ado, Dr. Kashiwagi is thought leader in the areas of education, leadership, and development, procurement, and supply management. He received his PhD from Delft University of Technology in the area of supply chain management. His research led him to co-develop the best value approach, a revolutionary and international round approach to business. Their groundbreaking model is the most licensed technology out of Arizona State University. Dr. Kashiwagi continues to champion programs to advance the fields of project management and procurement by presenting to large groups, inspiring young people, giving back to the community, and publishing books. His most recent book, In Search for Truth, has gone to sell hundreds of copies and help professionals, parents, and students all over the world. So we are going to turn it over. And if you have just joined the meeting, please make sure that you put yourself on mute.
Thank you, Pam, for the introduction.
You're welcome.
Okay. Let's see if I can share my screen here.
Yes, we can see it now.
Awesome. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's a joy to be with you, especially from my own home. It's even more of a pleasure. Hopefully, you're able to get something out of tonight, and it can help you in your career and help you on your projects, help you to be able to save money and become more efficient. Let me see. There we go. I want to start today with a little story from John D. Rockefeller. If any of you don't know him, he is the oil tycoon. In fact, because of his desire to make sure that oil was at a very low price, he was always looking for ways to save money. And some of these ways were very obvious. Some people might have fought back with him on them, though. One of these ways was when he was watching the barrels of oil get soldered, the top get soldered and closed. He found out they were putting 40 drops of solder to shed it close. And he asked a question, why don't we just use 38 drops? And probably the people doing it thought we're saving so little money by doing 2 less drops. But in reality, what ended up happening was they ended up starting to do only 39 drops of solder. So 1 less drop of solder. The first year it saved them $2,500. But it went on, because of their size, to save them millions of dollars in our currency. One small change that was very obvious, very simple, but it's something that had a very big impact. And what I'm going to relay to you tonight, the model I'm going to relay to you tonight, is something that it doesn't require a lot to do. It's very simple, but it is counterintuitive, meaning many people, they don't either, one, when they look at it, they don't understand it because it hasn't been explained correctly to them, or they just don't want to see it. Tonight, as we go through this, if you have any questions at all, please voice them. If I go over a concept, you don't understand it, please ask a question. Everything, hopefully, if I did it right, should be very simple, and you should have very minimal questions to ask me. Let's get on with this. The agenda, this is my agenda. First, I go over the logic. Then I'm going to identify what the logic tells us is required to set up a high-performing project. Then we'll review Agile. And from the logic and the ideas of the logic, we'll find a way to improve and make Agile more usable and higher performing. And that's when we get into the best value approach. So I'm going to get started. The first thing we want to ask is, what creates risk? What is the one most important thing we can do to make sure that we have no risk and we minimize any issues on any project that we perform? And what it really comes down to, if you look at the industry structure model, this on the x-axis, you have perceived competition. Everybody wants to be on the right-hand side because higher competition leads to lower costs. But what we want is we want high competition and high performance. And what they have identified leads to the highest performance is very simple. It's when you have somebody that actually knows what they're doing, that they're an expert at what you're doing. But not only do you have to identify an expert and bring them onto your project, but you have to listen to them and you have to utilize their expertise. I can't tell you how many people I've seen hire an expert, but then go around and tell that expert exactly how to do their job, when to do their job, and what the parameters should be in doing their job. And so the two requirements is we need an expert, and then we need to utilize their expertise. And that's what gets us out of the price-based model to the best value approach or the best value model, where we get the most bang for our buck. But the issue is what? This is really the biggest issue, is that when we are trying to find an expert, there are non-experts chickens that get in there. And these chickens muck everything up because we can't tell the difference between the expert, the person who knows exactly what to do and how to do it, and the person who really doesn't know what they're doing. And this is the biggest issue in the industry, I believe, that companies, organizations, and people can't tell the difference between who the expert is and who the expert isn't. Because when it really comes down to it, if you have an expert, it doesn't matter what model of management you have, the expert will always do a great job. You have to really do something crazy to stop an expert from performing. And what we have found in the construction industry with all the different delivery models, what really mattered wasn't the delivery model. It was that they had an expert on the job who knew exactly what they're doing. And this is what I tell vendors. I tell vendors, if you want to know how to win a best value approach project, you find someone in your company that actually knows how to do the work the most efficiently and better than anybody else in the world. And you let that person bid on the project and do the project. Now, how are we going to make sure we always have an expert and we can tell the difference? So I'm going to show you 4 principles of logic here. Just 4, they're very simple. And from that, we're going to kind of get an idea of a framework that we need to make sure that only an expert can get on our project. First logic, experts can see into the future. Now this one's very simple. I have this water bottle here. This is the key to life. Not because this is water and everyone needs water, but because this is simple. Why is it simple? Because everybody is an expert in this situation. If I release this bottle, which way is it going? Hopefully everybody said down. Hopefully you didn't have to think about it because it's a very simple situation here. It's because we understand the law of gravity that if I release this 100 times, will the bottle ever stay right here? Will it ever go up? And of course the answer is no, because we all understand the law of gravity. So we all, now being experts, can see into the future. We actually know what's going to happen even before I run the 100 tests. And this is a key to understanding expertise. When someone understands what's going on, there's a couple of things. They need very little information to be able to look and see the end. You don't have to know what object I'm holding. You don't have to know like the parameters of the diagram of it. You don't have to know what the dimensions are. You don't have to know all the laws of physics. You don't even have to know the exact equation of law of gravity. And I can be anywhere in the world and you know exactly which way this bottle is going. Now, every project is very similar to this. You have what we call an event. Every project is an event. You have initial conditions and you have final conditions. An expert will be able to, at the very beginning, because they are experts, they have all the information, they understand what's going on, they can actually predict and tell you what's going to happen, even without knowing all the information. And we've seen this in life. We see it with the stock market. People with more information on companies, they're able to best predict when to buy and sell stocks. That's partly why insider trading is illegal, because people with that much information, they can actually know exactly what's going to happen. You see this with sports, you see this with everything. The more information someone has, the more they can predict the future. This is something experts can do. And they can actually even see into the future on your project with very little information. Why? Because like we understand the law of gravity, experts understand natural laws in projects, that when they get a little bit of understanding of what's going on, they're able to exactly know what's going to happen without having all the details. Now that's the first logic. The second, experts minimize thinking. Now this one's a little counterintuitive. I actually mentor many high school students. We started a nonprofit called the Leadership Society of Arizona. We go out and we teach a lot of high school kids the exact same business principles we're teaching you, because we found out if you teach them when they're young, they learn the correct way. And I tell all of my students, don't think. And they say, don't think. I say, don't use your mind. They said, why don't you want us to use our mind? All of our teachers are telling us to think. This is how we're supposed to learn. And I let them know, all intelligent people try to minimize their thinking, try to minimize how much they use their mind. And I'm going to take you through this real quick so you understand. First, we want to know, how powerful is the brain? A lot of people say it's very powerful. But actually, when you look at psychologists, this is what you find out. First thing they find out is human beings, when we see, we don't see accurately. We see things according to what's going to protect us. And so this is kind of the development of sight. I don't know how many of you could tell that there is actually a tiger in this picture, but that's why we developed being able to see in color, so we could protect ourselves and know when there is danger. When we actually test our eyesight, a lot of people, they're looking at the top and the bottom color. It looks different. But actually, if you just put a simple medium there, you can start to realize that they're actually the same color. It's the same thing with these two different cube colors. They look different because of the shading around them, but that's because our eyesight is bad. They're actually the same color. And of course, we have the very known, I think it's supposed to be what, white and gold or blue and black, something like that. I can only see blue and black. So for those of you who see other colors, I can't see it. Now, this other psychologist found out that people have very low attention spans. And what this person found out is that people miss a lot when they're looking. I don't know how many of you noticed, but the title of the slide changed. And so I'm going to go back here. If you look at the title of the slide, if I go back, this is what it started out as. But because our focus is only drawn to one thing, it's very hard for us to actually see everything going on. Now, here's a video. Try to see how many changes in the background.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
It's actually going to tell you.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
Action.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
It's very tough for us to see changes. I had some students, when they see it, they're like, I saw 5 changes, I'm amazing. And then they find out almost everything in the background changes in this. They changed the dead person on the ground. They changed his coat color even, took off his coat. It's really an amazing thing. But this next psychologist, what she found out was that in life, people actually remember things wrong, and they can remember things that are inaccurate. So she'd bring people in, show them this little flyer with Bugs Bunny at the Disneyland Resort. A lot of people say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, the issue is Bugs Bunny is not at Disneyland. It's Warner Brothers. But these people would come in, and as she showed them this flyer, they would begin to tell her their childhood memories and how they would meet and even shake Bugs Bunny's hand and get on his lap while they were younger. And what she found out is most people, they remember things wrong. This researcher found out that most of our decisions are made off of emotions and our feel of a situation. Meaning, if we went to Burger King and found $20, we're going to think, Burger King's my favorite, their food is awesome. Even though their food might not be any different than anyone else, but if you went to McDonald's and you got robbed, then their food automatically is not very good, right? It's because you remember things according to how you feel, not according to actually what you know and what's actually going on. It's the same thing with our bias. The psychologist found out most people have a bias. If you choose something, you look at all the positives. Everything else, you look at the negatives. You have this optimism bias they found out that people have. Smoking kills, you might know that, but you're believing that you're different, that you're that 5%, 10% of people that will not have any issue with smoking their whole life. Of course, you have your self-serving bias. When something goes really well, of course it's because of you. When something doesn't go well, of course, it's because of everything and the chair you're sitting on that day. So what does all of this mean? Basically, when you look at all the research of the mind, you start to figure out we don't see right, we don't pay attention well, we don't remember well, we don't process information well, we don't make decisions well. The mind is actually flawed. And so now let's start looking at this. One of the things Sugatra Mitra, he's an educator, found out that when people start thinking too much, they get stressed. And when they get stressed, he found out there's a place in the back of the head that shuts off all learning capability. So he realized the more someone uses their mind, actually the less they learn, which is an amazing thing. As they start to look at people who are very good at what they do, they measure the top 1,500 CEOs, measured their brain, found out the CEOs are more productive, more creative, more innovative when they're in what they call the flow state. This is a state when their mind is largely shut off, that they're actually not thinking. You see this in sports. They practice and practice, and when they get on the field, they don't have to think about what they're going to do, how they're going to hit or shoot. Their body just knows it. When you look at all the experts, all the people who become very good at what they do, they're always trying to minimize their thinking, minimize their use on the mind. You can see this in many people wearing the same type of clothes every day, so they don't have to make a decision on it. They make things very simple, so they don't have to think. This is Scott Flansburgh. He's a human calculator. He can do complex mathematical calculations quicker than a calculator can. When they measured his brain, inactive. In fact, everything shuts off but his visual portion. And what he tells people is when he does math, he doesn't have to think about it. He just sees the answer. And this is much like anyone who's really an expert in anything. They don't have to think, they just know it. What they find out is when things are simple, when they don't have to think about it, do you have more risk or less risk when things are simple? Of course, you have less risk. You know exactly what's going on. Do you have to make more decisions or less decisions when things are simple? Less decisions. Because there's only one option here. You only make a decision when you think there's two options. Hopefully, you don't think there's two options in which way this is going to fall, right? Here's a decision-making case study. They measured a lot of professionals in making decisions on which contractor will perform better. This was done in the Netherlands. What they did was they created a computer program to go against these professionals. And this is what they found out. Perfect score is 0. They found out that the computer scored the best. But amazingly, the students who knew nothing actually scored better than the professionals did. And the professionals didn't score much better than the randomly generated answers. It's an amazing study. But this is what they found out. That when people start using their head too much, they start thinking too much and trying to use their own experiences on things, they actually end up not being able to understand what's going on. And they make the wrong decisions. So it's important to realize that experts minimize thinking. The impact of this means what? They're going to communicate less. They're going to minimize collaboration. They're going to minimize their decision making. And where an expert is, you won't see a lot of this. When this person knows what they're going to do, they don't have to do any of this. Because the more people are doing this, does it make things more simple or more complicated? More complicated. And you only have to think when things get complicated, right? And this is a big issue with the industry today. Okay, the third, I'm going to use a story for this one. This is Boeing's plane. Around the time of World War II, they made it for the military. It's a bomber, the 299. Everybody knew that this was the highest quality product that they could get compared to any other plane that the government could buy for the military. They were experts. Boeing was an expert at making planes, especially this bomber. But what ends up happening? Everybody knew they were going to get the contract, but the day of the test run, the pilot actually crashes a plane right when he starts to lift off. The pilot ends up dying, the plane goes up in flames, and they no longer get this contract. An investigation started to happen. They found out a locking mechanism was stuck on the plane. Their contract went to Douglas, but they continued to research the issue of the plane because it was such a high quality product. They said, well, we need to train our pilots better, and that's why this plane crashed. But the test pilot for the plane was the military's top pilot. So they said it can't be that we need more training because he was the top. So what they ended up doing and what Boeing ended up finding out is they had to make it simple for their client. And this is what they did. They made a checklist for every pilot who got in their plane to go over the checklist when they started, when they took off, everything. This actually became a standard in many industries to make a checklist because it makes it what? It makes it simple. And experts realize the only risk they have is that people who are not experts at what they do is going to mess it up. So they realize they have to make it simple for everyone else. And that's what happened. Once it became simple for the military, this is what ended up happening. The Douglas plane, they never did a bombing run. They weren't very good bombers. And the Boeing plane, it became the B-17 Flying Fortress. One of the main reasons why we're able to do so much damage in the US to the other countries we're against in World War II without losing many lives. This is what happens when experts are on a project. They realize that even if they do a great work, even if they're experts and everything is simple to them, if they don't make it simple to their clients and everybody else, then they're going to have risk on their project. So that's the third logic. Experts make it simple. And let me give you some examples here. See, not all stakeholders are going to understand the right-hand side, the blueprints, the diagrams. But anybody's going to understand if that's what the bridge looks like when it's done, that's what I like. And if, as long as it's stable, obeys all protocols, that's what I'm looking for. See, clients, they need something that's very simple, non-technical. They don't need to see all the technical details. That's for the expert to understand. And so experts know they have to make it like the left-hand side. Everything they do has to be simple. It can't be technical. It can't require thinking of anyone else. Now, this is another kind of example here. Roofing. Normally, the metrics we do is very technical. They're KPIs is what we call them, right? Tensile strength is 800 PSI for the material of our roofing system. What does that mean? Is that going to prevent my roof from leaking if I'm an owner? To be honest with you, nobody knows. Nobody to this day will know if 800 PSI is enough to stop a roof from leaking. It's a pretty high PSI, but no one knows what that number really means in terms of performance. On the right-hand side, you can see the metrics here. These are what we call non-technical simple. That if I know the contractor that's building my roof has 65 customers that will vouch for them, 25 on average, the roof age of these customers are 25 years of age, and only 99% of them leak, I know that this roofing contractor is going to do a great job, right? These are metrics I can understand. Okay, this is the last piece of logic for you, the fourth logic. As experts have no risk. They focus on risks that they don't control. Now, this is a key. See, here we have the expert and the non-expert. And you need to realize that the non-expert is what we call blind. They can't see because they actually don't have the expertise to be able to look into the future. When someone is blind, the only person they can see is who? It's themselves. The non-expert is only going to worry about what the technical details, because that's all they can see. They're just worried about being able to do their part correctly. Now, the expert on the other side, this is what we call visionary, because not only do they don't have to worry about themselves, they could do their job with their eyes closed. The only thing they're worried about is looking into the future. When you see into the future, you see everybody else. That's the only thing that's going to cause risk on their project, is people who don't know what's going on, who they can't control. That's the only risk they're worried about. They're not worried about themselves and their technical understanding and how they're going to do it. They're worried about how their system's going to integrate with the client system. They're worried about what the client's going to do when they get their system, to make sure the client knows the right steps on how to use their system. Now, if you take these 4 logics, now, one of the things I do have to tell you is when you look at the non-expert, they're only focused on the technical. So on your project, if you're only focused on the technical pieces of the project, who are you more likely to attract? The expert or the non-expert? And of course, you're going to attract all the non-experts. Why? Because when you start relaying technical information to vendors, you're basically allowing people who have no idea on what to do to come into your project, because you're giving them the technical information they need. When we tell clients, when they go out to get experts, we tell them, don't tell them anything. Just tell them you need a roof. You want it to last long. You want to have minimal maintenance on it, and you never want it to leak. If they're an expert, they know exactly what type of roof you need. And not only that, remember, they will make it simple for you. So you don't have to make a decision on it. You know exactly that that's what you need. Now, we're going to take these 4 logic pieces. And this is the requirements for a high-performing PM system to ensure no non-expert gets on your project. 1, you have to make sure that if any vendor comes to you, you require them to look ahead and see into the future. They have to be able to tell you what's going to happen in the future. 2, they have to know how to minimize risks they don't control. They have to take all accountability for their technical expertise. 3, vendors must be able to simplify it for you. It's not good enough that they tell you, yes, I'm an expert at this and I know exactly what to do. They have to relay their plan, relay why it is that they need their product to you in a simple way that you don't have to think about it. Everybody can see it. Now, with that, to make it simple, they have to measure themselves. Not in terms of technical details, but in terms of metrics, performance metrics, simple metrics. And then, of course, when you have an expert, they're not going to want you to tell them what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. That's the best way to scare an expert away. Why? Because when an expert sees this going on in an organization, all they see is waste. All they see is a headache, and they will run, because experts don't want to waste their time. Usually, they'll come in as a marketing person, tell you exactly how it's done, and then they'll leave, because they don't want to spend any time with an organization that's going to waste their time. So these are the requirements for a high-performing system. Now let's go over Agile here. Agile is great because it's very flexible. That's why it was created, for the flexibility. It was created to make sure you bring all the experts on board. The issue with it, though, is it didn't require anyone to look ahead. It increased collaboration, increased the talking, increased the complexity on projects. And so there was a trade-off here. Some of the guidelines of Agile, it was iterative. You have short sprints. You're going on. You're learning from each. The only issue is when somebody's an expert, there's no learning that they need. They know exactly what to do. You know, I remember a project. I was helping a project management organization. They needed a new electronic file manager. So they had all these PDFs, all of their information on projects. They wanted a way to organize it better and to have a system, a database, where they could access their information better. They brought all these vendors in, these technology vendors. They all had great presentations, very flashy, looked amazing. But when we got down to it, I asked the vendor who was selected, what is going to be the difference between now and later? What is the advantages to the client? And of course they said, oh, you know, all these things, this is like so secure, all this stuff. When we got down to it, it wouldn't do anything for the client. It was just a new flashy system that they could put all their documents into a thing that looked nice. And it was just upgrading the graphics. What ended up happening is that project management organization looked at the $200,000 cost and they said, we no longer need the service. And they didn't even hire anyone. They saved themselves $200,000, had the same thing, right? When you don't look ahead, when you don't see the whole thing, then you can actually start going on here, learning these different things only to find out you really don't need a lot. And this is the issue. If we're looking this in terms of an event, you have the professional, they come in, you have the money and you have the man hours that you need, and you have the time limit. But because no one's responsible for looking at the very end, knowing exactly what needs to be done, you start going through these sprints and you're completing requirements. But inevitably, by the time you get to the end of this, there's requirements left over because nobody was accountable for keeping it in a certain time frame with a certain budget. And when these requirements aren't met, who's responsible for this? Everyone worked together. Is it the buyer or the expert that needs to fork out the money? And this is a big issue here. So when we look at the Agile system, although it has a flexibility and it allows you to collaborate and get a lot of experts together, what we really want to do in a high-performing PM system, most of it is the exact opposite of the requirements of creating an environment that invites an expert into what you're doing. What ends up really happening is we have more price-based characteristics than best value characteristics, than high-performing characteristics. Now, I know I went really quickly. This might be a little shock to you. So make sure if you have any questions you're asking. If not, I'm going to now talk to you about the best value approach. And the reason being, and the reason why we've been doing this for the last 25, almost 30 years now, is because we saw the numbers. In every study that's being done in research effort, they're finding that project performance is low. It's very difficult to get a project on time, on budget, with what the client needs, and having the customer satisfied with what they received. And you can see this in every industry. Every industry, they're having the same issue. Now, the best value approach, it was built off the logic of realizing if we are going to make sure we have an expert on our project, this is what we're going to do. First, we have to minimize thinking, decision-making in all forms of passing information. We have to make sure that if someone tells us they can do it, that they can see it even before we see it.
Excuse me, Rory, could you please mute yourself?
Thank you,
Rory, or Jacob, if you see him on the thing, you can mute him. I've lost control now that you're host.
Okay, I don't, oh, here, I can mute it.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. Again, I put some of the requirements, what we're looking for. And this is kind of some of the results of the best value approach. Our sole purpose is to utilize expertise and then to let the expert do their job. But what we want to do is make sure they're accountable for what they do. Make sure that they can explain it, make sure they can measure it. These are the performance numbers of all the research we've been doing. And we've gone all over the world doing this with large and small organizations, public and private, it doesn't matter, because what we're dealing with is a humanistic issue. It's not an actual structure problem. I know many of you will ask, well, can you do this on top of another delivery or project management model? And yes, you can. Any model that's taking advantage of these 4 pieces of logic, you're just adhering to the natural laws of people, then you can actually integrate this in. Now, we actually have a model that we have found works best in implementing all these pieces of logic and creating the right environment. So I'm going to quickly go over this. First, you have the preparation. We let the vendors know, look, you're going to be accountable. We're not going to give you a lot of information, and we want you to make things simple, and we want you to have metrics that can prove that you've done it before. So when you go into phase 2, the selection phase, this is when you have an RFP. Most RFPs, or most things where we go out and select vendors from, we don't give them a lot of technical information. In fact, most of the scope of works are within one page, even less. You're talking about multi-million-dollar projects, less than one page, because we're expecting the vendor to know all the details and what the client should get. Now, in selection, we're not asking for any technical details on their scope of work. In fact, the best value approach is a vendor-centric model. Since the expert's the only one who can minimize risk, we're going to require the expert and the vendors, one, to select themselves. And you might ask, well, how are we going to get the vendors to select themselves? We created a selection model where you cannot make a decision. The vendors, if they don't give you information that looks like this to let you know they are the best ones, everybody gets a 5 rating. A 5 rating means we don't know. Everybody's evaluated the same unless you can give us dominant information, performance metrics, showing us that what you're going to give us is better than anyone else. And it needs to stick out just like this. As you can see in the selection criteria, one of them is level of expertise. We want the vendors to give us a claim on something they can do. For example, we have the best project manager for this type of work, but we're not going to believe their claim. Then they need to give us performance information that shows us that this project manager is the best. They've worked 100 projects, similar size and scope as your project. 98% on time, on budget, and the client is 10 out of 10. They're extremely happy. Now that gives them a high rating. But they're supposed to give a claim and performance metrics. They're supposed to identify risk that they don't control. We don't care about technical risk because we assume they have it under control. All we want is that they understand the non-technical risks and how things that they don't control is going to be minimized. Now, we also want to utilize our expertise in their value added. Do they see anything on our project that would add tremendous value to us at no cost or minimal cost? Once we identify the highest ranking vendor, the highest performing vendor of the vendors giving us the information, then we bring that one vendor, the one expert, into clarification. In clarification, this is where the expert has to make it simple. They have to not only tell us what the scope of work will be, so the expert is creating the scope of work, but they have to explain it simply so all of the client stakeholders can understand it. They have to show us some metrics on exactly what they're doing. Metrics cause no discussion, meaning if I were to ask how many water bottles am I holding, there's no discussion on that. It's 1, right? These are the type of metrics we're looking for. We want the expert to lay it all out. Now, to give you another view of this, this is how we want to measure a project. This is the metrics we're looking for from a vendor. We show them the client requirement. The client requirement is just what the current situation is. The client's showing you this is what we currently have in metrics. And the expert is telling you, don't worry, we've done it before, we've done a ton of these things, and you're going to get a better product, better service, better satisfaction than you received in anything else. More money back, more savings, more value. And then during the clarification, so we're in phase 3 still, they are going to pre-plan this entire project. Many people will say, oh no, a vendor can never know everything because we don't have all the information yet. We tell the vendors, if you need pieces of information that you don't have, guess. Use your expertise to predict and make assumptions on what's going to happen. Insufficient information, you don't know what a stakeholder is going to do, predict. Use your expertise to know exactly what's going to happen because they can see this without even thinking about it. They just know what's going to happen. Now, here's the thing. Once they lay out the entire plan, everyone's happy with it, that's when we sign the contract. And the contract is the vendor's plan. The vendor's identifying in their plan if they're wrong with their assumptions, if they're wrong with what people are going to do, what the impact is going to be on the project. So they let you know ahead of time in the contract, if this happens, this is what we're going to do. If this is wrong, then this is what we're going to do for you. It allows for the flexibility of changing the plan, but it still holds the expert accountable for having a vision from beginning to end on what's going to happen. And so what's going to happen here is when we get to phase 4 execution, the vendor is going to create this weekly risk report in the clarification. And this report, I'm going to show you some examples. It will track any deviations to their original plan all the way through the project. So at the end of this project, any deviations, it's going to clearly show why the deviation happened, what the impact was of it, and what ended up happening from that. So kind of to give you an idea of what should be in the vendor's clarification documents or plan. They should have all of these things. They should lay it out. The only thing the vendor does not create in the contract is the contract terms. The legal terms, that's the client. The client puts all of those in. Why? Because they need them. But the vendor and expert is making everything else, the entire plan, the scope of work. So this is an example of construction project. You can see these are the metrics you're tracking. Over budget, over time, customer satisfaction, who's causing the delays, who's causing the over budget. Their milestone schedule. They have a schedule. You can see they have the initial schedule that will never change. The actual schedule they're filling in as things happen. If there's any deviations, you can see what they're doing. They put a risk. And in this documentation of why this is a delay or why something happened here, you go to their risk tab and they actually explain to you, this is what we told you would happen. This is a deviation that actually did occur. This is what we did to resolve it. And this is what the impact was to the client in terms of cost and time. And this is how bad it was. They give you updates each week, non-technical updates on, hey, just to let you know, these are the main things we're looking at. These are the things that you might want to be looking at for the future in this project from the expert. And basically what you have here is in the beginning, you have the expert becoming accountable by making their plan. You bring all the stakeholders in so everybody knows what the plan is. We put blindfolds on the stakeholders because they're not experts at this. During the project, you then have deviations, risks that occur, and the tracking of all the metrics. And then in the end, you have one simple place where if anybody wants to know why the project was delayed, why the project had an increase in cost, that there's one place that everyone can go to know exactly what happened. Now, let me give you some examples of where this was done and what had happened. First, in the Netherlands, they did one of their ministries, their infrastructure ministry, they're over all the shipping and transportation and also roads. It took them 12 years to get one project done, from procurement all the way to execution. So this minister said, in the next years, you have to complete so many projects in 3 years from beginning to end. They didn't know a way to do it, so they found the best value approach. And this is the result. In the time frame, instead of just completing 10, they actually finished 15 projects. And you can see the metrics. Took less time, took less effort from everybody involved. Even in the procurement, it took less effort from the vendors and the client. And when they actually looked at what happened, all deviations were caused by who? The client. Any expert vendor realizes the client is their biggest issue. This infrastructure billion-dollar project actually won the Supply Chain Management Award in the Netherlands. It was the first time one of the government agencies won this award. But you can see in the Netherlands now, they taught all their professionals this way of doing business, and now all their professionals are actually doing projects this way. A lot of people say some industries, you can't predict the future, but they even did this on medical equipment that they had to build, meaning there was no such medical equipment like that in existence. They were actually hiring people to build what they needed. And so even new medical equipment, they required the vendor to have a full outlook from beginning to end. In the US, you can see all the people who have implemented this. In the state of Oklahoma, they did this on every type of service you can imagine. You can kind of see what they found out here. When they actually got done with the projects, you can start seeing the savings that they had. $30 million savings on $54 million spent. That is absolutely amazing. Simply by letting the expert come in, be accountable, and show them what they're going to do for them. Even on something like a light bulb project, meaning they're buying light bulbs and they're implementing and delivering light bulbs. It's amazing, a commodity, but they saved a lot of money on that even. Here's some of the types of things they did. Some are more complicated than others. And here's the conclusion. In following these basic 4 pieces of logic, using this best value approach, they're able to save so much money and time. But it allows for the flexibility that you need, right? You want the expert to look at the whole thing, beginning to end, but you want them to have flexibility for the risks and the issues that could come up that nobody could foretell. But you want them to be accountable. You want to know exactly at each point, what was the impact? How does it change the overall plan? Now with this, we've had an adjustment. When we first started out, it was only in procurement. But what we started figuring out is procurement is a client-centered type environment. We actually need to shift this to be a vendor-centric environment where the vendor has control of the project. This actually deals with project management. And so we actually moved our efforts to the Schema Business School in Lille, France, where we have multiple different researches on project management and how project management can integrate this into what they're currently doing. Of course, there's books, there's all sorts of things that we do that you can get a hold of for free if you want more information. Here's some of the information. There's some books that we have out. These are written actually by Dr. Dean Kashiwagi. He does have the same last name because he is my father. So I've been working with him. I went and taught at Arizona State University because I wanted to work with him. Mainly because I'm trying to utilize his expertise so I don't have to go through all the years of learning that he went through. But he wrote some books. Joseph is my brother. He does all the coordination. So a lot of you might be asking questions, well, how do I do this? Where do I start? If you contact Joseph, he can schedule a time. We love to help people. If you really need a lot of work done, then it is at a cost. But there are many times if we see a good win situation, you're willing to share the information on your project, that we will help you at minimal cost to be able to implement this and share your results with how much money it has saved you and how much the impact it has on the value of your projects. And I think that's it. Thank you so much for the time. I didn't see any questions come over or whatnot.
We do have some questions if you have time.
I do have time. We'll go as long as you want to listen to me.
Okay, so we do have a few questions that came in, and we're going to start at maybe the oldest and go to more recent. So this is more, sorry, then I didn't filter them that way. Are there any limitations, constraints that make this project management framework or methodology contextually inappropriate for a specific project or timeline?
You know, the way I like to answer this is we were over in a large private organization, and they were asking, well, don't we have to get approvals? Don't we have to do this and that? And Dr. Dean responded and asked them, do you have to get approval to use common sense and logic in your organization? And the key here is all of this is common sense and logic. Many of you, when I was going over the pieces of logic, you already knew these. You've seen it in the past. There is no constraint on these ideas in implementing them. Now, if you have an the only one is if you have an organization that bans using common sense and logic, then that would be something that where you do not want to try to implement this. If you have an organization that doesn't want to be transparent, that's also another limiting factor. We have gone to organizations. One was in Malaysia. They're a Chinese developing company, very large. You're talking about billions and billions of dollars in development. They did not want to release any financial information. They didn't want to release any information because the government would try and take them over if they ever actually became transparent. And we told them, yes, you know, that is a valid limitation and it's one that we can't help you with.
All right, the next one is, would you call this a new framework or a new methodology, and why?
I would call it a new both, mainly because currently in the industry, the traditional framework and methodology that was used was telling someone what to do. And as much as we know that micromanagement is not a good thing, if you look at the whole structure of everything we do, it all involves with people collaborating. It all involves with people talking. That you have to have this communication. And what we're actually trying to help out with is you might need communication, but we want to minimize it. Because when you see too much of this going on, you have too much risk. Much like when you see an older couple that's been married for a very long time and they're going at it like this, you don't get involved. There's too much risk in that, right? And it's the same thing on projects.
I like that. All right, this next one is, if known, is this appropriate for both private sector and government, whether it's local, state, federal, for all those projects?
It definitely is. What you want to do, what I tell people, when you're trying to implement this, the thing you want to do is find the most intelligent people in your organization. Because the majority of people, when this goes down, things become more transparent. When you start to measure, things become transparent, and the majority of people is going to scare them. And so you only want to find the intelligent people, and you want to run undercover doing only what we call case study, test projects. And do it on one, do it on something, the highest risk you have. Why? Because this is a no-brainer. You're going to save the most amount of money when everyone else sees risk. And then when you actually have the value and you have it documented, that's when you start opening up to more of your organization.
All right, so this next one is, when solving for very complex problems within a project, is there an, oh, I don't even know what that word is. I'm sorry. Does the model provision for it? Solving complex problems within a project, does the model provision for the solving of that?
Yes. It's just a different way of doing it. Many times when you have a very complex issue, you try to gather all the experts together and have them collaborate. The clients, people, everyone. The way we solve this is we go out and we tell all the experts, this is what we need you to do. Come back when you know you have someone who knows the answer. We want the one guy who knows the answer. And we want them to be accountable for it and them to lay out the plan for us. That's what we want to do. Now, many people say, we don't have an expert in this arena. Sometimes that is true. But in all of the projects I've seen, even in the very specialized ones, I really haven't seen anyone where when the client actually opens up and looks for an expert, I've never seen where they haven't found them.
Good point. This next one came in light of COVID. I knew there was going to be a COVID-related question. I make sure that my team is on a daily stand-up, and we talk a lot as everyone is now remote. So I know that you covered talking less, so it seems counterintuitive to the talk less when we've all gone remote and we're trying to talk more. So.
And I understand, even within my own organization and we're a very small organization, very specialized with just the best value approach. There's about 8 of us. And even within 8 of us, you always get the people who start doing this too much. You want a briefing, but you want it to be like what? And how we do it is we're always adjusting our performance metrics. So when someone reports to me, I don't want them to have to tell me anything. I want them to send me a screenshot of their metrics. And by looking at their metrics, I have no questions for them. That's what I'm looking for. And so it's good to have a weekly meeting, but the meeting should be to say hi, to do your community development and therapy session. And everybody just puts their metrics on the board so everyone knows, yes, everyone's okay.
All right. This next one is a comment, and it says, remains to be seen if Boeing 737 MAX crashes have been due to lack of pilot training, truly design flaw, or too complex.
Now, I was talking about Boeing when they're smaller of an organization. Boeing is a very large organization with a lot of this nowadays. And the way they do business is not the most efficient. So I have no doubt that maybe it actually was a design flaw. And they might have even known about it. But because this is going on and they're not using the logic, there's no accountability. They can't pin whose issue it is because there's so much collaboration, so many decision-making and approvals that were taking place that it's very hard to pin it on actually who knew it or who could have stopped it or who made the mistake. And that's what happens on most projects. You never see in a group of collaborators when something goes wrong, one person lift their hand up and say, that was on me. I'm the one that made that decision and I'm accountable for it. It's very tough to see that.
Mm-hmm. So this one is, how can this methodology be applied for internal projects? So the projects that there's no external vendor and only your internal resources are going to be used.
Yes. Now, before I go to the slides, I'm going to go to this, right? You have, this is the owner and this is the vendor. Now, here, this is external. We want to make sure there's minimal of this. See, because people don't realize when a vendor does this to the client, it causes the client to think. If they have to think too much, then the client has to start telling the vendor what to do. Right? Because too much thinking causes decision-making. Eventually, the client's going to decision-make. But when you switch this around like this within an internal organization, you have the boss and you have the worker. And it's the same relationship between the client and the vendor, right? Internally, it's the same way. When you want to use this internally, one, the biggest issue we've seen with vendors and with internal project management is that people don't even know who's an expert in their own organization. There's no ranking system on this is our best PM because we actually have metrics showing every project they're on, they do the best, right? They don't know what the ranking is. But the second thing is, if you look on the screen now, if I was a manager of an organization with people under me and we're doing projects, I would have everyone do a weekly risk report. Before anyone is allowed to do a project, they would have to plan it out, identify the risks they don't control, and show me that they know exactly what's going to happen if they're going to spend money and resources. And I'd want them to make all of this, what their scope of work is going to be, how they're going to measure themselves. That every week they're sending me minimal information, showing me they're on schedule, on budget, and any deviations they've documented, and they're doing something about it. Hopefully answer your question there.
So this one's a comment. This sounds too good to be true. I love getting periodic customer feedback as we have little knowledge of what capabilities they want delivered. So it was a comment that came in.
This is something so simple. It almost is too good to be true, because it's so simple, it's so hard for people to implement for some reason. It's against human, even though it's simple, it's against human nature. Human nature, we want to talk. We see people, we just want to tell them what to do. It's just like in our nature, it's so hard to curtail that.
All right, and so this is the last question that I've gotten right now. So if you have a question, make sure you get in the Slido real quick. And so this one is, most companies are now using Agile. How do you incorporate Agile in BVA?
Now, this is a tough one, because as you can see, a lot of the Agile principles are actually opposite to what the BVA is trying to do. That's why it's called a paradigm change, and it's why I would call it a new methodology. But if you have to use Agile, what I would propose is you still require your expert to plan your project all the way through. Even though you know you're going to have short iterations, even though you know things are going to change, that up front you tell your vendor, I still want you to tell me and give me a vision of what's going to happen here, what this project is going to look like. Make the assumptions you have to make with information we don't have, and give me a vision here. Show me how you're going to measure this. And if you can hold out with the metrics and making them always give you a vision all the way to the end of the project, that at least will be better than not having any of the principles implemented.
So what's the largest obstacle you see in adopting this new methodology?
Humans. It's all political. In some of the clients, in very large clients, I don't know if you remember, but the Olympic Village at Utah held the Olympics a while back. In the making of that Olympic Village, they actually used the best value approach, which wasn't nearly as developed at that time, but they actually used it for many of the housing for the Olympic Village. What ended up stopping it is the vendors that were in the system due to relationships that no longer could get projects because they didn't know how to do them. They actually raised protest. And it went political, and the leaders didn't know how to explain. And so because of the politics, it got shut down. And so that's the biggest thing we've seen, is making sure you find people who are intelligent in your organization that aren't going to try and shut it down, but people who really know what's going on and are willing to do it. It's simple, but you got to be willing to do it.
Thank you. So that was the last question that we had. Did you have anything else?
No, thank you so much for having me. If you do want more information, if you feel that you do want to implement it after hearing these ideas and whatnot, please contact Joseph at his email. And we love to be able to work with people who are wanting to be more efficient, wanting to implement this type of thing. Also, if you want any of the books or anything, send also an email. It's a way to get a free book.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to address us today and share your knowledge with us. For those of you on the line, thank you for taking time and joining us as well. Don't forget, we've opened up our PDD for September for registration, and we do have a lunch and learn later on this month. So check out our new revamped site with our new logo and look and feel. And see our events out there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good night.